Welcome to the Maritime Vision podcast. I'm your host, Paul Wioli. In each episode, we bring you exclusive interviews with maritime professionals, industry experts, and students. Our guests come from different backgrounds, including shipping, yachting, offshore, supply chain, and more. Our goal is to give you all the knowledge you need to succeed in the maritime industry. Welcome to the Maritime Vision podcast. And today we are joined by Maurice Jansen, a port ecosystem expert, business developer, education innovator, and researcher at Erasmus University Rotterdam. Hello, Maurice. It's a pleasure to having you in this podcast episode. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes. So thank you for having me in this podcast, Paul-Louis. So my name is Maurice Jansen. I'm born, raised, educated in Rotterdam, as I always say. Pretty much under the chimneys of the port in Vlaardingen, a little port town, opposite of the Shell refinery. And I think, my whole career has been really colored by the port of Rotterdam. And I studied there at Erasmus University, business administration. I went into logistics for some years, so really in the business. Basically across Europe, all kind of projects in supply chain management. And at some point I thought I want to develop and share knowledge on port development. And that I think was around 2006, where I started to work in an education institute, Shipping and Transport College here in Rotterdam. Again, very international, did some international projects, especially in education infrastructure across the world. Again, of course, on port and shipping management. And now already 6 years here at Erasmus University in the Urban Port and Transport Center.
Okay, very interesting, very quite broad profile. So today we're going, of course, to talk about port management. So Maurice, I will have a lot of questions to ask you about it. So yes, it will be today quite, I think, a little bit longer than I expected this episode, but I think it will be very interesting. And first of all, I want to ask you the question, what are the fundamental aspects and consideration when you want to develop a port project?
I think the first thing you need to, indeed, you say port development and management, and there are two different things. But first thing to understand is that a port is, of course, in a pivotal position, and that has multiple levels. Yeah, so the basic level is, of course, the ecosystem. Yeah, so ports are usually at a crossing of land and sea, or land and river. And quite often these are very populated areas. There's a lot of human activities, industries, logistics, cargo handling, but also recreation, leisure, people just enjoying the waterside. So in the location of the port itself is already kind of an interesting, let's say, area, because you see a lot of human activities happening at one specific point. And then there is, of course, also the bigger picture, where you have, let's say, the port as the function of the port in a global system, a global transport system, which, of course, for a lot of people, you can't grasp that function. But when you go to the port, if you go to the Maasvlakte, for example, here in Rotterdam, you go to the coastline, for example, in Le Havre, you look out over the water. Yeah, of course, you see the container terminals, you see the big ships coming in, and you see the cranes, which are larger than life. Yeah, so there, all of a sudden, you get immersed into a world that is larger than life. We could say beyond human scale. And of course, the global transport system is also beyond human scale, because at some point in time, over maybe 50 years back in time, we created this global transport system. And I think that is the fascinating part of port development and port management, that it's this multi-scale that you can see right at your feet. And of course, you're part of it. You're standing there in front of the water side and you see it. You're experiencing it. And I think if you take a group of young people, which I usually do, of course, because I'm working in education, if you take them to the port, then I get usually the remark like, yeah, so now I really realized this whole concept and what you've been talking about and the scale of it and so that's how you need to also bring port knowledge across to other people to let them experience it.
Okay, very interesting. So for you, something which is quite important, this is to take into account the population around the port when you want to develop the port or even to extend the port. Do we have other challenges right now very important to take into account?
Yeah, of course. And this is, of course, when you look at it from a research point of view, this whole, I call it the port ecosystem, is very complex. And it has it's a lot of challenges and challenge is always kind of covering up that there is a lot of problems. Yeah. You can say, there is a problem, that people say, oh, it's a challenge. No, sometimes you just have to define the problem. Because if you don't define and name the problem as they are, they're not getting solved. And of course, that is what you see also in a port context. You see a lot of emissions. You see pollution on the water, in the air. You see plastic, for example, plastic waste pollution, or let's say surface water covering the surface. But you need to fundamentally understand that these problems don't start in a port, but so often they don't start in a port, but they kind of become visible in a port. Of course, talking about plastic waste, a lot of plastic waste is created on the land side because we throw it in the water or we throw it on the street. And then, of course, by the wind, it blows into the water. And then, the wind makes sure that it's collected at some points. So it's captured in some port basins, for example, or it flows into the sea. And that is something that we need to understand that, ports are kind of, again, it's this complexity of human activities that comes together in one point. And of course, the forces of nature, the wind, the currents, the flow of the rivers, makes it that, all these problems come together in one point. I'm just talking about one little problem that we can define, plastic pollution.
Yeah, okay. I imagine you have many of them. But to come back about, you talk about port location. So how do geographic, economic, and logistical factors influence the decision-making process when you need to select the location for a new port?
That's a good question. And one of the researches that we have done recently is about port-city symbiosis. And we define this ideal location on the basis of a couple of what we call stocks of capital. So the first is the natural capital. The location of a port very much depends on what nature has provided for us. Look at Le Havre. You're from France, I know.
Yes.
You're from Le Havre. And 500 years ago, 1517, one of the kings of France, they decided to create a new port in the river mouth of the Seine. If you go to Le Havre, you see a very nice mountain ridge. On the north side of the river, there's a mountain ridge. This is, of course, let's say, a national protection. So it's, of course, the delta of the river Seine, but it's also the mountain ridge creating a kind of a shelter for all kinds of storms or bad weather conditions. So I can imagine, so this would be an ideal location for a port, and we're talking about decisions that were made 500 years ago. The same you could apply to the port of Piraeus in Greece. So the navy of the city of Athens was in Piraeus because it was a sheltered port. The same you can look into Cartagena, which is a Roman port, or Cartagena stems from the city of Carthago in the southern part of France or Spain. So there, again, natural shelters are very important. That's the natural capital that creates, of course, an ideal location for a port. And the same, of course, you can apply to Rotterdam because, for the real, let's say, coal and iron ore trade between UK and Germany, Rotterdam was ideally positioned right in between UK and Germany in the, let's say, Industrial Revolution. That was already ahead in UK and was starting up in Germany in the 19th century. And of course, there we need to create some own, let's say, conditions. The new waterway, the connection between the city and Hoek van Holland, to help nature a little bit.
So that's why
that's where the industrial capital comes in. So it's not only the natural capital. Without the natural capital, you cannot create industrial capital.
Yes, makes sense. And that's why the port of Rotterdam or Antwerp, for example, became so successful that the place to make it, then the right location.
Yeah, I mean, location, geography plays a very large part of the ideal location. But once that is there, of course, you need to create, let's say, industries and logistics operations that connect the world. So that's, of course, the importance of having kind of a vision on the future of shipping. So the connectivity between ports becomes important. How many services per week, how many sailing schedules, how many capacity that you can mobilize on a specific shipping route.
Interesting. By the way, nowadays we have this big concern about sustainability. So what kind of principle and practices nowadays we can make to integrate this sustainability into port development?
What I'm also recently published about is you have to look at port development and port management from an ecosystems point of view, and you can neglect ecosystem values, or you can nurture ecosystem values. So the neglect and nurture is very important. I'll give you an example. Again, coming back to the natural capital, if you neglect dredging, if you don't dredge the port, that's the natural phenomenon of sedimentation in river deltas. Of course, neglecting dredging is devastating for your position because you cannot have the big ships arriving anymore. So that is very much concrete. But also neglect is about air quality. If you neglect the air quality, and you want to set up a cruise terminal or cruise business, I don't think very pollutive ports, and I've been to a couple of them also in India recently. They have tried to set up cruise activities there, but the cities are so polluted. I cannot imagine tourists would enjoy walking around in a very smelly and dirty quayside. And I mean, this is also it comes to the same principle. Economic activities and environmental quality, they provide together the condition for sustainable development. Not the one in favor of the other. No, it's the both, combining the both qualities that will give you the prosperity.
And you talk a lot about, I've seen on your profile, about zero waste supply chain. So I think it's gaining importance, this. Can you explain what is it exactly, the zero waste supply chain?
If you coming to the principle of environmental and economical development and reconciling them into sustainable development, you need to come up with a performance indicator or a drive for a specific performance that kind of relates both to ecological and economical qualities. And that's why I think zero waste as a common measure or common driver, I think is appealing to business people as well as to environmentalists. Because you cannot disagree that you're against or zero waste. Yeah, as a business person, it makes sense because waste expresses it also in time waste. Yeah, waiting time. At some point, someone needs to pay for this waiting time because you're leaving capacity idle. Yeah, that could be a truck waiting for a quayside or for a terminal. That could be a barge operator waiting for a container terminal. So waste is time. Waste is also, let's say, products that become perished because of the waiting time. Yeah? So if you had mangoes or let's say fruit from Latin America that you don't handle good in, let's say, temperature controlled equipment, of course, that's also waste. You're transporting a product that is not going to be sold on the market. So why would you transport it at all? Yeah, if you're spoiling the quality of it. And that, of course, also requires cooperation in the supply chain. I can also continue with air quality. Same principle. So emissions, and I'm very glad that the ETS is coming now. At least the carbon pricing, and maybe ETS is. There's a whole discussion whether the emission trading system is the right market measure for it, but we need to have a carbon price just to make the waste part in the supply chain, to make it visible and to internalize it into our supply chain operations. Whether we agree on it or not, it needs to be part of our supply chain. And luckily, from the 1st of January, shipping emissions as waste, air quality, is going to contribute now also to the sustainable development of our transport system. And yeah, I think this is a markstone in international supply chain management that we are witnessing.
But in terms of infrastructure in a port, what kind of infrastructure can we develop to avoid this waste and all those issues with sustainability?
Yeah. I mean, a port and port infrastructure and port facilities are always an enabler, for the logistics activities for transport companies. The transport companies, they are the ones who are emitting when it comes to the transport emissions. As a port, you have to create the facilities and the infrastructure. For example, what you now see in the world, the green corridors. So you see different pairs of ports to say, hey, it doesn't make sense that I'm the only one investing, for example, in an LNG terminal, because the ships depart from your part in Singapore and they arrive in Rotterdam. So why don't we jointly develop certain fuel infrastructure that allows the shipping companies to bunker their vessels wherever they are, either on Asia side or on Europe side. So this green corridor development for multiple types of fuel, because that's the real complexity now. The shipping companies, they play, they look at it from a risk profile to say, hey, if I'm going to invest in a methanol ship, I need to make sure someone needs to secure the supply of bunker for that vessel. Otherwise, I'm not going to invest in methanol. And the same goes for hydrogen or ammonia or LNG. So at this point in time, we see, let's say, the emergence of multiple fuels for shipping entering the market in order to decarbonize our shipping. That's also what the IMO is pushing for. And I think ports play a very important role to de-risk the decarbonization transition
Okay. Yeah.
for the shipping lines.
Yeah, I mean, collaboration between ports are, I think, quite important. Do we have the same? Because now I want to talk more about the digitalization part, technological advancement. What kind of advancement, innovations we have right now in port? Because I know that the port of Rotterdam is quite advanced in digitalization.
Yeah, it goes. That's it goes in all different directions. So port community systems have been um, around for some 25 years, I
Yeah.
think. A little bit longer if you look at Singapore. They were the first ones to really implement a full-scale community system. Rotterdam port base is also very well developed, and what you now see is all kind of applications and different services are developed on the basis of the needs of the community. Yeah, so if the port of if we're walking into a problem of lack of collaborative planning for let's say barge vessels arriving in Rotterdam, you can see that Next Logic, that's one of the innovations that came to market last year to really optimize the planning, the barge planning on the Maasvlakte 2 when they arrive to the container terminals.
Mm.
And it was previously everybody was waiting for each other and very unstructured barge vessels arriving at random times. This is now the system is now very much controlled and managed, but also very interestingly, it's voluntary. Yeah, you can say
Mm.
still as a barge operator, I'm not participating, but of course you don't get the benefits from it. And that's the whole thing with port base. You subscribe to a service. Of course, then you pay a transaction fee because you get the benefits when you take part. And well, I was reading it yesterday. Over the last year, 20% efficiency savings was realized through this innovation, Next Logic. And here also the role of the Port Authority is important because this is a very complex project with high technology intensity, a very uncertain outcome. Because it's very new technology, it's collaborative. Yeah, so there is all kind of stakeholders that at some point in time say, yeah, but I don't see the benefits for myself, so I don't participate, and then they step back, and so someone needs to orchestrate this complex project and needs to make sure that the overall arcing vision is supported. Although the main players are kind of seeing more problems than solutions.
Okay.
I think that's the achievement of the Port of Rotterdam as a whole cluster, as an ecosystem of companies, that we persevered in that project product innovation. IT solutions often require trust, require long-term relationships. Quite often also it's more the social aspect of the innovation rather than the technological innovation that makes the difference between a success of an innovation and a failure of an innovation.
Okay, quite an interesting point, this one. What kind of trends right now you see in the ports nowadays in terms of technology? I mean, do you see that AI will take the lead? You have drone or all those stuff.
Yeah, I must say I'm a spectator of the digital innovations, so I don't develop it myself, but I look at it, and I think the AI indeed. So the next logic that I was talking about is pretty much built also on a artificial intelligence way of
Yeah.
planning. I think we're only in the early stage of development of what AI can mean for the port. I think it has tremendous opportunities, also risks. Apart from AI, I see a lot of cyber resilience that we need to make sure.
Yeah.
Last year, DP World and also other companies, we have seen Maersk. We probably don't hear all the cyber attacks that are going around,
Yeah.
in different ports in the world, but definitely they are there. So the resilience to cyber attacks is a major issue we need to be working on. Of course, very much kind of it doesn't really help that. I mean, it's like countermeasure. Eh? So a lot of the IT is always to make the port more efficient and optimize processes, but this is very much a countermeasure to
Okay.
make sure we don't have a port that is dysfunctional.
Okay.
Autonomous vessels, I'm more skeptical about.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I see it happening in remote water areas, like in Norway,
Yeah.
on the fjords, where you have dozens of ferries crossing, 10 kilometers of
Yes.
water. There it makes sense because you don't have the interference with other ships.
Ships. Yeah.
The more busy the traffic, the less opportunity I see for autonomous vessels.
At least for now. Yeah.
At least for now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
time
and
will
quite
come.
interesting point.
Yeah.
And we have another part of port development. This is port city integration. What can you say about it? What is the most important factors about port city integration in terms for the population, but also to make it dynamic for the professionals?
Yeah. What first comes to mind is to have an open community dialogue between port stakeholders and city stakeholders. We always call that inclusive port development. So you involve stakeholders right from the early stage of a initiative to develop a port in a certain direction. It also manifests itself very much in areas of the port city where urban activities and industrial activities meet each other. For example, here in Rotterdam, you have the Makers District on the, let's say, we'll call that the city ports. The city ports have developed over over maybe 100 years and reach a certain point in the that old industries really deprive. They go either companies go bankrupt or they are moved to other places in the port with better facilities. So what do you do with the abandoned areas? You see that
Yeah.
across different ports. London is a good example with Docklands. London Gateway was also developed in on the east side of London, which was very much deteriorating. So when economic activities go down, of course, you see also poverty coming up in those areas. So you need to, as a city, you need to do something with that land. And how do you develop that land? You really come into kind of a concept that we call, let's say, again, this symbiosis. But it is from different values, different point of more urban values, livability. Of course, noise is an issue. Because these areas don't change overnight. It's a very slow process. It could take decades before the old industry departs and the new urban activities, for example, housing, gets developed. So what do you do with when are you going to build those houses? What do you do with the noise from the industry? How do you make sure that in the transition of this, from port to city, that stakeholders can live next to each other?
Okay.
And
Yeah.
the shared value and the shared planning of those activities becomes very important. And what you often see is there's a lot of entities, a lot of stakeholders who plan a specific part of that interface without looking at the others' values.
Okay.
And that, of course, inclusive port development makes sure that you develop these new functions in a collaborative effort.
Okay. Okay. Quite interesting, and I think it's very important to take into account this part when you want to develop a port. Maurice, do you want to take a little break, or do you want to continue as we still have I can say 9 questions?
Oh, no, I mean, I wasn't. We talked about community dialogue, but the other thing I would like to raise is the need for talent. The
Oh yeah.
dialogue is also highly needed if you want to make sure young people see the port as a potential field of work for them, to set up a career in the port. And that is, in a lot of European countries, we have a population where we have an aging population, so a lot of people leaving the job market, and not sufficient young people enter the job market. That's
Okay.
across the whole labor market, across the whole economy. So you get a competition for talent. Well, we talked about Youngship, Youngship Rotterdam, Youngship International. There's all kind of young professional networks. In Rotterdam, I know there's 8 different young professional networks. Youngship is one of the very international ones. They have branches all over the world in port cities, and they play a very important role to engage young professionals like yourself, I believe, to say, hey, this is an industry that I can see myself working in. Of course, when I leave the university or have developed myself a specific craftsmanship, and then I want to work in the port, as an electrician, as a mechanical engineer, or as a civil engineer, maybe as a stakeholder manager or as a school teacher, and all kind of possibilities. There's, I think, some 200 jobs in the port, and people don't realize that if you want to become a policeman, you can also become a port policeman, for example. Or you want to be a surveyor, or you want to be a security officer, you can also find a job in the port. So the versatility of a port makes that whatever career you want to take on for yourself, there is also a position in the port possible, and you get the view, you get the international aspect, you get the people that work in the port, you get it all in one package. And that's what I hear if I talk with people on network meetings, that they really enjoy working in the port because of the combination of it, the ships, the cranes, the size of and the scale of it, but also the warmth of the people, the passion of the people. And that is a story that we need to tell to the youngsters. Of course, the 20-year-olds who leave the university, but also the 12-year-olds who go into high school.
Okay, yeah. And especially in the maritime industry, the visibility is not so high. So I think we have a big work to do about, big job to do about attract new people.
Yeah, I mean, in the Netherlands, it's a small country, so the distance to the sea is not so far.
Yeah.
But if you go to France,
it's more complicated. We
it's
have
more
big
complicated.
Yeah,
how many people have seen the beach in France if you're living in the middle of the country or in the Alps? I mean, that's a different for us. It's relatively easy to take people to sea, to take people to the port, but you need to do it. we are also at this point talking about, and this really comes fresh from the discussions. We want to take every school child in his school career, starting from 6-year-old to 20-year-old, they have to see the port 5 times in their
Oh, wow.
careers. Not just
Wow.
1 time, 5 times.
5 times. Okay. Interesting.
At
That's
some point,
the.
you need to find this sparkle. And we believe the sparkle of, hey, I want to do this with my career, doesn't just happen once, but you have to be there multiple times throughout that school career.
Yeah, that's the reason why the maritime cluster in the Netherlands, I mean, the number of people working in the industry is quite high in comparison with the neighbor in Germany, for example, or France. I think it's because the young people are quite used to the sea quite early in their age. I mean, by practicing, sailing or even visiting port, etc. All those kind of activities, yeah.
Yeah, and of course we have all kind of festivals. So we have the World Port Festival in Rotterdam, the largest public event in the Netherlands, 350,000,
True.
sometimes even 400,000 participants in 3 days. This is really huge. But we also have different difficulty reaching specific groups of young people, and so some of the people we don't get them engaged. So we have to have a better story for those people,
Okay.
and we are working on that also.
Okay, quite interesting points. Nice. Okay, now I want to talk more about the financial part. What are the common financial models to develop a port? I'm talking about stakeholders, so can every aspect of financing a port.
That's a big question, but
It is,
let me try. What you see a lot in across the world is public-private partnerships. There's across the world, there's a lot of public ports. Public ports means the government pays for port development, but the general idea is that commercial investors and companies are much better equipped to assess the commercial risk of a port development. The commercial risk, I mean, is there a market for a specific port handling activity, for example? You could say, look at offshore wind, for example, look at container handling, or bio refineries. I mean, as a government, you're not going to set up a biorefinery. You will be looking for companies who are into biorefinery, and then to say, hey, what market do you see for yourself in terms of biofuels in the future? And do you think the public port that I'm running or the port that I'm running is a good location for your facilities? This is how you try to set up a public-private partnership. You say, okay, as a public authority, you could say, we're going to provide you the basic infrastructure, the land, the accessibility by road, by water, by train. But when it comes to your port premises, you need to pick up that investment in setting up the biorefinery.
Okay.
And I think is the combination you need to be looking for. So the public authorities looking at the political risks, and of course also the infrastructure that just needs to be there because you're making sure that roads and pavements and all of that is also accessible for other people that are using it. But the commercial risk has to be picked up by a commercial party. So we call that the landlord model,
Okay.
where you combine these two together. For example, in Rotterdam, I think we have over every year some 3 to 4 billion euros of private investment. And the port authority invests some 300 million per year as a landlord. Yeah, so of course that is not the case in every port. We're talking here about the biggest port of Europe, but it really shows that the attractiveness of Rotterdam is very high. But it also has to do with the energy transition, right? The Port Authority has a vision laid out into the future. Say, hey, we're going to build here the most sustainable, the most energy efficient port. So this is the right location for you. And that port vision is, of course, created by the Port Authority, but always in collaboration with the companies. Yeah, the Port Authority is going to ask these companies, what is your future? And on the base of these discussions, they're creating a port vision. And on the port vision, these investment plans are, of course, being made on a more, let's say, concrete level.
Okay.
So the vision is then translated into a master plan, is then translated into a business plan. So it's like this. This is what I also call symbiosis, the interaction between public and private actors in this ecosystem, that they jointly work on, let's say,
Okay.
changing the future of the business.
That's an important point. So you mean that most of the port use like private actors and of course public actors to bring all those capital, or we have some port who doing only like with public funding, or other port only with private funding. Or it's always combination.
Yeah, uh, there are still ports that are being developed on public funding. The risk there is that if you don't assess the market well, you create all kind of facility that nobody is going
Yeah,
to be looking for.
true.
And if you know there's a private company, of course you have to look carefully whether the financials of this company are healthy. Yeah, so the continuity of that company, of course, is this a company that has been doing well over the last decades, and did they also kind of what is their market share and what is their own outlooks? The quality of such companies is, of course, very important for the public authority to partner up with. But I believe that the combination is the ideal model.
Okay, okay, okay. Good point. And now more about regulatory challenges, because of course I think it's quite important to take into consideration regulatory challenges. What do you think port needs to take into account if you want to develop something in a port? So first of all, what kind of regulatory are the most important one? Because of course we have IMO, etc., but more for in the port for port development.
And the most important challenge always is to bring together national regulatory frameworks with international regulatory frameworks.
Okay.
And that's again, this is the local versus global dimension that we're talking about. On a global level, we can agree on the Paris Agreement, we can agree on the SDGs. But of course, on the local level, you agree on the permits.
Yeah.
So a permit, you get a permit from the municipality, and or from a local port authority with let's say a public-private interest, and this is different for every other port city is different. And then here it comes again with what are the values that you want to cherish. Are you going to cherish the economical values first over environmental values or biodiversity? And every port, and of course we have the same here in Rotterdam, sometimes we have just a conflict because of these values. Talking about nature compensation, for example, or biodiversity, or noise. So we're not talking here about all the big things and ETS and regulatory frameworks and how that work, but also I mean, the conflicts are usually on the details. On the nuisances that community has with port activities. And I think noise is a very good example. But also air pollution and biodiversity, very much underestimated subject in port development, I think. But also, I mean, what do you do with spiritual values? Or I can imagine if you're in places where you have a lot of, let's say, minority groups or native tribes or native communities, they also have right to live on the land of the port that we now call a port. That could well be maybe their ancestors' grounds, which you're now claiming for port development. There's a couple of situations in Kenya and in Australia, in Canada, where also port development needs to be reconciled with these kind of values from that goes centuries back, in generations. So sometimes they are very invisible.
Okay, quite interesting. So we talked about like regulation, etc. What about now? I want to talk now about two last points. Then I think we are quite done with all those information. What can you say about multimodal transportation connectivity? So, like, how can a port be strategically connected to various modes of transportation, like rail, road networks, and to optimize the logistics?
Yeah, it comes down to what I said in the beginning. So if the port is endowed with a very nice water infrastructure like Antwerp and Rotterdam, you can use the waterways for transportation. And when it comes to bulk transportation, bulk commodities, it's very intensively used between Rotterdam and the hinterland in Germany up to Switzerland. When it comes to containers, it becomes more difficult because often goods that are travel in containers are much more time sensitive. And collaboration in the supply chain is much more needed there. What you there see is you need to kind of optimize a whole network of activities. If you want to set up, let's say, multimodal transport, you need to compete with trucking, and trucking is very flexible. So you can imagine if you want to bring your container tomorrow to Germany, you can call a trucking company. In half an hour, 1 hour, you have an empty container standing in front of your warehouse. If you want to do this multimodal, you need to first look at the shipping schedules. And then you find out, okay, I'm lucky. Today there is a sailing. Or, I'm not so lucky. My destination only departs on Friday and not on Monday. So what do you do then? So what you see is the commitment of cargo to a specific transport mode depends also on the frequency. The higher frequency, the more cargo owners will say, hey, indeed, I can also put my container on a ship instead of on a truck. But it's really about the frequency and, of course, also the capacity that is available on that route that determines whether you could ship your containers also by other transport modes.
It's fair point. I imagine, especially in the Netherlands, I think they want to develop the interland connection. I mean, using barges instead of trucks, because in terms of pollution, it's more optimized.
So in absolute terms, you could say that barge transport has grown over the last 20 years. But in relatively speaking, the modal split is still the same as 20 years ago. But overall, of course, we have been able to ship more containers through the port of Rotterdam. More is shipped also by truck. And that, of course, also leads to congestion on the highways. So what we need to see also is that indeed absolute numbers by barge and by rail increase, but also the relative share of barge needs to be increased.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, makes sense, makes sense. And especially we have the infrastructure, I think, in the Netherlands for inland shipping to use this, because I think highway are quite busy, especially in the Netherlands. So yeah. I want to talk about the last topic, which is capacity planning. So this is very quite important. It's about, a capacity of the port. For example, when you want to develop a port or a terminal, you need to take into account the future. How can be the scalability, and of course, if you want to develop terminal, if it will be like a iron ore terminal or container terminal, what can you say about it? How can we just how can we like plan the future to say, I think this is this terminal at this place we need to build?
Yeah. Well, scalability, you always need to look into the where are you developing the port. If you're developing a port in a very densely populated area with a lot of human activities, coming back to the same concept as I taught right in the beginning of the podcast. So your natural capital is the space that you have available on the water side. So you could basically say that for most European ports, space is very scarce. So scalability is difficult. In ports like India, for example, I was there recently, or Tangier Med, Morocco.
Yeah.
Space is not that scarce, so you have more leeway to say first phase, second phase, third phase. So depending on the market again, you basically need to phase in port capacity. Now we learned over the years that full-scale port development doesn't really work. But phased planning, of course, it makes you more kind of responsive to market changes. So who can foresee the fuel demand for 30 years ahead? Nobody. So gradually you want to phase in different refinery capacity, different tank farms capacity, different pipeline capacity. You're phasing that in over a longer time of in the future. I think that this is basic port planning, so to say. We call that also adaptive port planning.
Okay.
You build the infrastructure that you need for customers that are needing it right now. So a good example is the container terminals here in Rotterdam, APMT and Rotterdam World Gateway. Well, they started in 2014, 2015 with phase 1. They had an option for phase 2 already.
Okay.
And of course, at some point, the Port of Rotterdam asks, are you going to fulfill this option, or should I develop it for another purpose? And then, of course, it's up to this market company to say, okay, let's put this second option in development. And that is happening at this moment. So as a way to anticipate and respond to the changes the market.
Okay. Quite interesting, because of course I've did like a class about it. Anyway, I wanted to ask you the last question of the podcast. What kind of advice would you give to professionals, future professionals or stakeholders who want to start in the field of port development?
First of all, I would say try to visit as much places as you can. Try to visit different ports across the world. Talk with a lot of people from different, nationalities, cultural backgrounds. Make sure that port is a very international business. And although it looks similar across the world, every country, every port has its very specific aspects, very specific culture, let's say interactions between stakeholders. And also the interaction with the environment is different. And I think we can learn a lot from each other in the way that we go about with these interactions between people, and of course between people and the environment. And it really broadens your mind and your vision. That these two are very important together. You need to broaden your mind to really make the right vision. And then, of course, you need to interaction to make it happen. So I think that's the most important lesson I would give to your audience.
Thank you, Maurice. Thank you for this episode. It was quite long, but very interesting. I think we say a lot about port development. So thank you again. And of course, I wish you happy Christmas and happy New Year.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Thank you for having me, Paul-Louis. And if the audience is interested, there are papers, publications out there. Of course, also some lighter materials, reading materials, or people can contact me if they want to know more. So happy to be part of your podcast, and I wish you all the best for the next year. Happy Christmas.
Happy Christmas. Thank you, Maurice. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening and watching this episode. We are looking forward to bring you more insights from maritime professionals, experts, and students. Do not hesitate to follow the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Your support means a lot to us and helps us to bring you more content.